Welcome to the inaugural episode of the series on Central Asia with the Oxford Global Society, an independent Oxford-based think tank. I'm Brian Wong. I'm a fellow and an advisor on strategy to the Oxford Global Society, OXGS. And today we're incredibly honored and excited to be joined by Mr. Djoomart Otorbaev, who was the Prime Minister of Kyrgyzstan. Djoomart previously served as the Deputy Prime Minister, then first Deputy Prime Minister of his country, and he was also prior to then a senior advisor of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development based in London. It is a true pleasure and privilege to be joined by you today, Djoomart. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So when it comes to the region of Central Asia, this is an incredibly important and geostrategically valuable region, clearly, whether it be in relation to its young population, its geographical location, but also its robust abundance in very important strategic minerals and resources at large. But Prime Minister Djoomart, would you mind telling us perhaps, why exactly is the region such an important core node of international geopolitics, and yet at the same time so overlooked in existing discourses and conversations? What do you make of this disparity and juxtaposition in terms of the attention that the region receives?
Actually, as economists, if you look to the area as economists, it's quite modest in terms of population. It's only 82 million people, not too big market, though it's occupied the territory of Europe, quite big. And actually, the overall size of economies is not big enough to be attractive as partner or as market. So a little bit surprised that Central Asia attracting so much attention recently from all corners of our world, from especially bigger countries. We have surprisingly more than 10 formats in the format like 5+1, where we five, and one is economically powerful countries like China, United States, European Union, Korea, Japan, Germany, etc., etc., etc. So a lot of interest from around the world to our region. And I would say that we may be so popular because of our potential for growth and to be also in the crossroads of different areas in Eurasian continent. The early days of the Great Silk Road, about 1,000 years ago, the Central Asia was the most richest part of the world, economically, culturally, and intellectually. The reason is that it was a region where West met East, not only in exchanging of goods, like Chinese porcelain or silk move westwards and gold, silver, other commodities move to the eastwards, but especially because of intellectual brains met in Central Asia and delivered a lot of excellent works. And what I would like to underline is that we are in the middle of so-called Eurasian rail revolution. That is on that fact I'm writing in many places, including in my book, which was published recently in London by Routledge, is that enormous land trade is going on between China and Europe. So every day, 2 fully loaded trains move between Europe and Asia. The reason is that last year, transportation by rail became cheaper than by sea, partly related to problems in the Red Sea. But it's not only cheaper, it's quicker. Instead of 2-3 months, the delivery from one port to one city to another take only 12 days between, let's say, Chongqing and Duisburg in Germany. It's ecologically more reliable, more cleaner. So it's moved through Central Asia. And now, when we see also emerging of north-south corridor between Russia, Central Asia, further to Afghanistan or Iran, to the ports, deep ports of Indian Oceans, we would see Central Asia as a real hub, transportation hub of Eurasian continent. During the time of geopolitical uncertainties, when seas become less risky for commercial ships to move, the land transportation between countries and regions which friendly to each other become more and more popular. So that might be the reason why Central Asia is back to the map of the world.
Thank you. And of course, just want to second what you said just then about Central Asia being the prototypical zone where the East met with the West. I remember walking along some of the galleries at the Louvre, Abu Dhabi, actually, and I was taken aback by how stunning, how stunning the sort of cross-pollination of Islamic and ancient Chinese civilizations in that part of the world was way back just over 1,000 to 2,000 years ago. And it's truly quite remarkable how much intermixing and mingling there was, thanks to geographical centrality, literally, of Central Asia. You also, I want to pick up on another point you raised on the interconnectivity, the importance of the region to railways and land connectivity at large, and the challenges in relation to the seas. Is this a reason why, in your view, whether it be the European Union with a rather recent Italy Central Asia summit that took place over 2 weeks ago in late May, alternatively, the China Central Asia summit, which, as far as I'm aware, is taking place, of course, in the middle of June. Is that a reason why these summits, these engagements are becoming increasingly ubiquitous? And how do you see the region situated between potentially rivalrous, potentially competing great powers, say China and the US on one front, and then the European Union and Russia on the other? How do you see the region as navigating these turbulent waters?
The history determined by geography, and our geography is unique, that we are all five landlocked. We don't have access to the sea. And one of our countries, the most popular one, which is Uzbekistan, is double landlocked. So it's always had problems, especially through the intensive maritime trade, which emerged in the Middle Ages. And actually, because of that emergence of the sea-efficient transportation and trade, Central Asia get down, really, because of trade from us to other parts of the world became not comparable and not competitive anymore. Because of the land transportation is much more expensive. So that is why we lost our superiority, which we enjoyed during Middle Ages. So now we are coming back. That is what I want to underline. We are again linking. We are not landlocked anymore. We are land-connected areas. So this railway transportation, especially with new technological advancement, railways like we see it in China, will completely change the economic landscape of Central Asia. Central Asia is rich in natural resources, as you mentioned in your introduction, introductory words. It's rich in hydrocarbons, in oil and gas, and we selling oil and gas to all our neighbors. We also quite rich in rare earth minerals, and every month we see some new discoveries on which is becoming really strategic minerals, and many investors coming to try to work with us on that matter. But I would like to underline that in the future, the role of Central Asia will not be focusing on that traditional areas. So the role of Central Asia will be growing because of young education of our population. So we have very high level of education as a legacy of the former Soviet Union. You can see it's all over in China, for example, when socialism in terms of distribution of national wealth, prioritize investment in education. Number one. Number two, we have very healthy demography. Every year, our population grow for 2 million people, 2% of our population. So from one hand side, we have young population, healthy demography. From another side, we have quite healthy economic growth. In the last, from the year 2000, average growth of Central Asia achieved 6.7%. In comparison with other places around the world, it's much bigger. Trade increased from 2000 9-folds, and foreign direct investments 70-folds. So GDP grew 4 times from 2000, and in 4 years grew almost 80%. So from one hand side, we have good demography. From another, we have economic growth. If you look around the world, many countries divided in 2 categories. One which is healthy demography but with a poor economic growth, another ones with a very good economic growth but poor demography. And in our part of the world, we meet 2 of these things, both demography and economic growth. And GDP per capita also growing in spite of the growing population. But again, my focus is to attract attention from all over the world, not to our natural resources, but our human resources. Young, growing population, which very thirsty for the digital economy and everything around, let's say, new technologies.
I want to return to a demographic question later because I think it's absolutely fascinating, both in terms of the numerical and the qualitative improvements and growth, so to speak. And yet, here I must bring in some of the challenges and sort of criticisms that have been made towards the Central Asian political economy over the past few decades. And that is, if we look at the Corruption Perceptions Index that was released in 2023, for instance, that year, it suggested that no Central Asian country had a score higher than the global average of 43. And that whilst, you've got countries such as Kazakhstan ranking highest and Kyrgyzstan performing quite well historically and in the run up to 2020, there's a general perception that whether it be in terms of political corruption or level of civil and political liberties, these may not be particularly healthy in the sort of countries that we're speaking of here. And that's at least a kind of perception and narrative that's often propagated internationally about Central Asia. Could you tell me a bit more about governance in Central Asia, Djoomart, and whether or not you see these claims and characterizations as accurate, as misportrayals, or potentially just reflective of one part of the story, a bigger picture, so to speak, when it comes to the potential and also a withal of the region at large?
Yeah. Okay. We are all only 33 years old. So in 1991, after dissolution of Soviet Union, we all discovered ourselves in the middle of nowhere. We didn't know what independent state does mean. We didn't know what taxes means. We didn't know what national budget means because everything was arranged through Moscow. So our emergence from zero to current level in 33 years is quite amazing, I would admit. You cannot, let's say, build civil society in one generation. Civil society which will be quite active in promoting the rights and promoting, let's say, different freedoms and democracy in classical sense of this word. But in all our countries, is moving ahead, these components. For example, we have elections. Many consider these elections as not fair or free, whatever. But again, this is a very big topic. And when we met previously with you, Brian, we discussed what democracy really means. So is it classic Anglo-Saxon democracy, which they wanted to move around the world or whatever. Recently, I met in Seoul at a conference with Nobel Prize laureate of last year, James Robinson. And I asked him, okay, you in your Nobel Prize principle, you advocating that only those who has representative democracy will succeed and will be successful. And then I asked him, could you give me in Asia example of representative democracy, which would be correspond to the principle which you're exploring in your works? And he said Philippines. Oh, okay, this is what I heard from him. But if you look to progress of Philippines, the last 100 years, it was disaster. It was one of the richest country in Asia, where it is now. What is the level of poverty? So even in Asia, I said, Asia, tell me, please, where we can pick up example. So at the end, I would like to express my opinion. I didn't get answer from him. Yeah, I said, is it end of history, which Fred Fukuyama told 30 years ago? Or what is happening now in emerging Asia, where there is no, if you look to, let's say, Transparency International rating, you will not find any Asian country in the front places. Huh? Which one? Would you tell me? Okay, Japan, Korea, right? Maybe some kind of winners or leaders, but in that respect, I would underline the importance of building middle class.
Yes.
Middle class in all countries around the world. When people have enough resources, financial resources, to think about governance, to dig into the places on how to improve the governance principles, institutions. And if you look to criteria, for example, which World Economic Forum practicing in measuring governance efficiency, then you see that all Asian countries moving forward with this criteria. Maybe not with the same speed if you compare, let's say, pure democratically elected and the opposition should be opposition, proposition, whatever this classic way. But they're moving ahead with other governance indicators like efficiency of the government, for example. Yeah, I don't want to name any countries, but I'm surrounding my debate, my thoughts around Asia. So we look to Korea, Japan, the countries with a good GDP per capita, they're moving ahead. But in the country of like Singapore, which is have even bigger GDP per capita, they have their own democratic traditions, not the similar to, for example, UK or US, and they're doing very well. And the level of trust to the government is very high. Or if you look to the rising star of our days, Vietnam. Everybody want to invest to Vietnam and make business with them. How you can characterize? I asked to Robinson, how you characterize Vietnam from the point of view of your conclusions? So it's very difficult question which you raise. So it can't be, let's say, make. But this is good question on how to determine the best democratic system which will help people to live better.
I think we can definitely agree on the fact that there are challenges, of course, and headwinds to all regions when it comes to political accountability and transparency. But I want to just echo what you said there, Djoomart, on a point about, the Acemoglu, Robinson, and Johnson point concerning the importance of institutions and democracy, which frankly the respective authors here have also evolved their theses and arguments about, over the past 15 to 20 years or so. And if I may also add in, two further observations concerning the examples they provided, of the Philippines, for instance, it's unclear if that theory that they have there ever made room for or could account for the role played by colonialism in enriching the global north and also in extracting from the global south, which had historically been really, very much up until the mid 16th century, the wealthier, regions of the world, where China and India had alternated, taken turns in being the wealthiest region, okay, not country per se, but region in the world up until, quite literally 500 years ago. And a second observation that one could make about that theory is it doesn't really differentiate between economic institutions, political institutions, and democracy, where democracy is a means of governance. It is one kind of political institutions, and within which we need to further disaggregate, right, and explore different kinds and forms of democracy, as you said. But it's not clear to me why democracy is a necessary condition for sound and robust political institutions, let alone sound institutions full stop. And that ties me on to the question I have for you, that in a piece that we worked on together in writing, PM Djoomart, we talked about the increasingly prominent role played by technocrats in Central Asia. And I think it would be useful here perhaps to look at specific examples, whether it be the transition towards Tokayev's leadership in Kazakhstan, or alternatively, the changes unfolding in your very own country, with yourself being, of course, very much, I hope you don't mind me calling you a technocrat, so to speak. So can you perhaps tell us a bit more about the changes in governance beyond the sort of binary of, oh, more or less democracy, which really isn't, as we've come to establish, perhaps the most useful framework of thinking about institutional reform and changes. What do you reckon?
No, we are passing our unique way to emergence of civilized, to be civilized nations. So number one priority for all of us, including our leadership, is to increase kind of the quality of life of our citizens. So in the first part of our discussion, I mentioned that we are doing very well in economic development. Our demography is good. Good demography means that families are optimistic about the future. Yeah? So they are not really running around, running away, or suffering. They happy to live in our countries and to have big families and to contribute through the knowledge, through the education, to economic development. So it is process. So after 33 years, we only have one generation which now coming to active phase, which were born not during Soviet times. And all our leaders in all our 5 countries, they are leaders which were not leaders of the Communist Party. The first generation of our leaders were all emerged, almost all, with the exception of my country, from the party elite, yeah, which had in their minds different kind of sets of principles on how to move things around, both in democratic process and economic development. So now we have so-called second generation of our leadership, which completely different sets of mind. They understanding that only together we can win. We can win as a region where 5 times 1, it will not be 5, but will be 10 or maybe 20. That is what we are observing. And that is how a younger generation of technocrats, which coming to the government, is really moving things quicker than I thought. I have been in the office 10 years ago, and if I look around now for the public servants, the quality of public servants qualitatively different in good sense of this word. People, really talented people, wanted to contribute to the country's development and to go to the public servant, and they were raised already during the years of independence, when you not anymore look back to Moscow, whoever, or Washington, who will save you. We all understand that only to be competitive, we can win admiration from everybody around the world. So we ourselves will help our nations and have to work hard to be competitive, but also to prioritize the matter of cooperation. Because in our blood, in our DNA, we are kind of friendly towards everyone. When you landlocked, you don't have privilege to have enemies as your neighbors. If you have access to sea, you can disagree with your neighbor, jump into the boat, and make friendship with somebody else. In landlocked countries, you cannot get it. You must be friendly. So we have now 0 enemies around the world, and we will continue these policies.
Just building on what you said there, which is the importance of multi-alignment, right? That one enemy is an enemy too many, and there's no such thing as too many friends. This is obviously a very important adage of Central Asian diplomacy. And yet, of course, the past couple of years have seen vast transformations to the region at large. To your west, you've got an active war raging on in Ukraine, following on from conflicts in Georgia, and also previously the Crimean Peninsula, so to speak. To your east, the rise of China as an economically very mighty power has also drawn, perhaps reservations and questions from some of its neighbors over what the future of East Asia would look like. And then, to your south, of course, lying to your south, there's this vast corridor stretching all the way from Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, through to Bangladesh, the Indian subcontinent. These are all conflict potential or actual conflict zones, okay? And of course, over the past couple of years, we've seen escalation in tensions across the board. Are you confident that this philosophy of opening up your doors to all parties, being friends with everyone, that could be sustainable? What if one day a region or power says, you've got to choose sides, you've got to take sides, you've got to accept that you're in my sphere of influence as opposed to some other powers of spheres of influence? How would you stand up to this sort of, almost bellicose, right, and imposing rhetoric, right, whether that be coming from your north, your east, your south, your west, or any other directions? Are you worried about this possibility?
No, actually, we what we say all the time, that we will never have friendship against anybody. Indeed, it's multi-vectoral policy, and everybody clear about that. Some say, okay, we give investment if you will not be friend with Russia. And we said, no, we will be friend with Russia for many different reasons, including historical reasons, including that the positive role which Soviet Union brought to the region, including the language. Through Russian language, we have access to world culture, including economic cooperation and people-to-people exchange. Some say, yeah, China is dangerous because they just swallow Iran. No, we believe that everything will be good in our cooperation with China if we will not asking for free lunches, if we will be competitive, which is very difficult with China. But this is where we are. We have to find a way how to be competitive in competition with the most competitive places in the world. We must work hard in order to be more prosperous. And the fact that we are small also helps. 80 million people, say big territory, but not big, too big economy, not appetite to be a geopolitical leader or big one. They also help. People don't see to us as a potential hegemon or something like that. All people look to us as a region which willing to cooperate with everybody. So US, yes, EU, of course, Afghanistan, sure, Iran, yes, India, definitely, Pakistan, of course. So this is where we will find synergy of cooperation, synergy of understanding each other, but again, to be competitive. We will not ask free lunches, free money, free loans, grants, everything like that from anyone. We have a very sustainable debt situation. Yes, we are borrowing from, for example, in multilateral financial institutions, and we're borrowing from China, Yeah,
Yeah.
but we also understanding that the debt sustainability also must be sustainable, must be kept under control. So, so this is if you have, let's say, good business in terms of public finance, you go for that, but be careful that you will be repaid them. So again, multi-vectoral policy is in our foundation of all our countries.
Tell us a bit more about the challenges. What are the biggest challenges and obstacles that would hold the region back from accomplishing some of the objectives you've outlined here? You know, are we to be concerned about potentially ethnic tensions and also border and territorial clashes? Are we to be worried about, say, the impacts of water scarcity, given, of course, climate change and the way that's shaping up, you know, and influencing the water bodies and flows in the region? What are the biggest sort of grey rhinoceroses and also, you know, black swans that you foresee to be issues that policymakers have to grapple with in Central Asia, Djoomart?
Yeah. Actually, you mentioned this kind of ethnical tensions, and the year 2025 became historic year for Central Asia because last potential disagreements on territory and the border, which is between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, was solved. There is no any more problems between our countries. It was very difficult process. Somebody could say, okay, why it took 33 years to fix this problem? Because of, again, unique geography of Central Asia. Maybe you heard about Fergana Valley. It's one of the most popularly dense place in the world. And the reason is that it's uniquely placed in Central Asia because they have good climate and enough water for irrigation. So all along the history, Fergana Valley was a unique place, and Tajik, Uzbek, Kyrgyz live there without asking who they are. And when Soviet Union demarcated and delimited the borders, nobody paid attention to that because we were in the same country. But when we became independent, and then population density is becoming very high, and not enough land and not enough water resources, then we had some tensions already between independent countries, which was finally solved earlier this year. The challenges against a link to the geography of Central Asia. So we don't have enough rains, and all our water for irrigation of agricultural fields coming from the melting of glaciers, from the mountains, almost all. And we have a big problems because of melting of glaciers, because of the global warming and different other processes. So amount of water which coming to irrigated areas dropping down. So this is extremely dangerous situation because about half of our population live not in the cities but in the villages, and their main business is agriculture. So something have to be done on water management. Yeah, we understand quite well that it's not our unique problem of Central Asia. In many other parts of the world, they face similar issues with the lack of irrigated water. So we have to learn on how to make it better. What I know that in India and China, around Himalaya, also there are some problems with the water delivery to the agricultural oases, which all the time were, let's say, have enough water, but now the amount of water is dropping down. So this will be ecological really challenge for us, how to sustain this climate change, warming and carbon footprint. It's not only a matter of fashion, of talk of professors in universities. It's a matter of survival of our region.
And of course, on this note, China has a critical role to play on several fronts, you know, whether it be in terms of renewable energy, and the broader new energy transition, right, with regards to solar panels, lithium batteries, electric vehicles. Alternatively, when it comes to water management and also the kinds of techniques and technologies required to safely process and recycle water, these are fronts that China has had developed, over the past couple of decades, comparative advantages in, no less because China is in many ways vulnerable to the very same challenges, especially in the north of the country, with water scarcity, concerns over safe and drinkable water, and also the ongoing effects and repercussions of desertification. So on this note, this allows us actually to segue quite neatly into a question I've always wanted to ask you, PM, and that is the question of China's relationship with Central Asia. Now, obviously, we've touched upon a Belt and Road, transport, rail interconnectivity over the past 40 minutes. It's been amazing. But one question that often lingers on the minds of some China watchers is the question of, can China build genuinely egalitarian and also symmetrically fair partnerships with its neighbors? And that's because, in a case of some other neighbors of China's, right, there's always a worry that when Chinese investments go in, they would build their own factories, set up their own operations, and hire Chinese as opposed to locals. And what the Chinese, would often do, because it's so good at producing these goods and manufacturing these goods, is to dominate domestic markets. You hear these allegations of so-called dumping, or perhaps China's engaging in the exporting of excess capacity. Is that a problem with Central Asia, or is that really an overstatement of a non-existent worry? What do you think?
During the Soviet times, we didn't know what's happening in the south of the Soviet Union. So we were disengaged with China, and during these 33 years, we're learning from each other. We're building step by step to build trust, to understand each other. That is why I always accepting invitations from Chinese universities or conference organizers, trying to explain on how to be efficient abroad. Because China is big, powerful, populous, and how not to scare others is that Chinese so efficient that they can capture, let's say, economies of the neighboring countries. So everybody should work hard in order to explain to all around the world that Chinese doing their investment not of the bad reason, but because of good reasons, to build a society of harmonious future and to create win-win situation. That is what is China leadership always continually saying. The matter now is to implement this policies in countries abroad. If we look to the Southeast Asia, ASEAN countries, then they have history of work with Chinese businessmen who travel there, who live there, becomes their citizen, making business. We don't have this history. So we're a little bit more, how to say, would say, scared what would happen if Chinese coming here. So it should be best practices. Only practices will show that Chinese businessmen, academics, or politicians coming to here with good intentions to give, not to take. That is something which can't be done overnight. But what is interesting is that amount of people-to-people exchange is a dramatic change. Last 2 years, it's changed completely. So many Chinese tourists, businessmen, academics coming to our region, and many our Central Asians traveling to China. So this is bringing understanding of different cultures and what to do, and mainly what not to do when you're abroad. I believe that we will find common understanding because our societies, our people clearly understand that we will survive only if we will be competitive, and we have to learn. So I believe that current tendency of Chinese economy focusing on modernization and high quality development, having very good response from Central Asia, because our talents I am sure, must be working not only in California for invention and discoveries of the 21st centuries, but also go to Hangzhou, Shenzhen, or Beijing to work with Chinese talents to make discoveries and inventions. So in that respect, this is a work in progress, I would say. There is
And
no
of course,
anti-Chinese ideas in our countries, but we have to build trust step by step. And in one of the beginning of your statement, you mentioned soft power, where China should do much more in showing the attractive parts of their civilization.
let's unpack the idea of Chinese soft power, because a mentor and a friend of mine, Professor Joseph Nye, was of course the very pioneer and also the trailblazing theorist who coined that very term and popularized it. And one remark that's often made about Chinese soft power, is a thought that it's much easier for an open and transparent and robust sort of civil society, coupled with a less perhaps centralized political system, to have soft power, because all you need there is to let your people speak. You can think of, say, Hollywood, for instance, as an exemplar of the American pop cultural gene and DNA, or Bollywood in India. Of course, you'd cast a shadow of doubt over the extent to which these are organic bottom-up initiatives, but by and large, folks would point to open civil societies as the basis for soft power. In the case of China, it's clear that governance works differently there, where you have a state with a far more hands-on approach to, public policy making, to shaping and also crafting the political economy, so to speak, not just of substantive material production, but also when it comes to ideological production, or alternatively discourse making, or so we claim in China studies. What advice would you give to the Chinese state then in relation to soft power? Do you think it's possible for such a sort of strong and present state to turn out soft power? And if so, what are the key tricks and techniques, so to speak, beyond what you said, Djoomart, concerning increasing people-to-people exchanges and tourism flows?
I clearly would state that China has the most richest elements to demonstrate your soft power. History, civilization, traditions, everything. So rich, unable to show to outside world. Showing example of Hollywood or Michael Jordan or Beatles, you not necessarily should look for the Western civilization as the best cases. You look to Japan, Asian examples. Look, Japan is a great nation in terms of soft power. Everybody like Japan. You just take example, and it's not American way or French way, right? Different way. Or look to Korea, which just entered that territory about 30, 40 years ago. How attractive Koreans now for everybody, including intellectuals, young people, simple people, all of them like Korea. Yeah? So let's move as example to the Asian way for the champions in soft power in Asia as a first step. Later, some other things can be taken as example, as a best practice. But in that respect, I want to underline that Japanese and both Koreans and Japanese achievements in soft power was started by the governments. I specifically describe that initiatives in my book. In Japan, it was in 60s of last century. In Korea, it was in 90s. Government launched an initiative under the title Smart Japan, Smart Intellectual Korea. And in China, government also can take initiative. The government in China is very strong. The best people in China work in the government. So you have to brainstorm in establishing action plan, who will do what and when, in order to show truth about China's unique civilization and history.
But also perhaps, a supplementary antidote to that is that China would benefit, or the Chinese people at large would benefit from, just having a more substantively diverse and comprehensive um, range of platforms to communicate and also to showcase to the world at large, right? The sort of plurality of China, because whilst the state messaging likes to emphasize that China is unified, China is, we are in solidarity, we're in unity. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of organic beauty in just the immense diversity of people in China that we don't often hear about, especially in sort of more Anglophonic media that tend to have a particular view of China that they enjoy enshrining, so to speak. In any case, I want to now shift the conversation back over to you. You've had a long and illustrious career as an economist, as a technocrat, as a statesman, and then eventually as, of course, the most definitively important, government leader and head in your country. You've also been a very impressive public speaker and orator and sharing your insights, generous with your time. What are your plans for the next couple of years? What are you working on right now that we can look forward to hearing more about going forward, PM Djoomart?
I'm still following advice which my father gave me when I was 13 years old. When I asked him, what should I do in my life? He said, it doesn't really matter. What are the key is that you always will be around clever people. So I still using this advice of my father and try to discover more clever people around the world. But in order to get access to them, you have to be also not as the same level as them, but relatively clever as well. So I still studying, learning, trying to express my opinion almost daily. I publish things in LinkedIn, for instance, different articles somewhere, opinion pieces, whatever, enjoying attending conferences, learning. So I still really thirsty to get learn from people around the world, especially those who will give me something new. That is why, Brian, I immediately attached to you when I met you first time in Hainan. And I said, this guy, I have to make friendship with him because I will learn from him. And thanks God, you also get caught in some of my qualities. So I hope that we will continue.
I am so incredibly honored and indebted to you for your kind remarks there, Djoomart. And on behalf of the audience back at home and those listening to this podcast episode, thank you so much for the generosity of your time, for your depth of insights, and also for how frank and forthcoming you have been about both the opportunities and challenges confronting Central Asia as a region. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, please join me in thanking the one and only Prime Minister Djoomart Otorbaev. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, and I hope to see you as many times as possible in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.